Ms. Denise Poh.
Mr. Speaker, may I take questions 7 and 8 on today's order paper together as both relate to BTO flats with shorter waiting times?
Please do.
Thank you, sir. Since 2018, HDB has been offering BTO flats in some projects with shorter waiting times of around 3 years or less. This is achieved by bringing forward the construction works for specific sites that are ready for development. To date, close to 11,000 BTO flats with shorter waiting times have been offered, of which around 7,200 were offered between 2020 and 2022, that is, during the pandemic. The pipeline of shorter waiting time flats has been impacted during the pandemic due to construction delays and disruptions, as well as higher BTO demand. To meet the strong housing demand, HDB has ramped up the supply of BTO flats to 23,000 flats per year in 2022 and 2023, or a 35% increase from last year, and is also prepared to launch up to 100,000 new flats from 2021 to 2025 if needed. Where possible, we also endeavour to launch more BTO projects with shorter waiting times, subject to site and infrastructure readiness. While waiting for the completion of their new flats, most flat buyers continue to stay with family members or relatives or rent on the open market. And the PPHS, or Parenthood Provisional Housing Scheme, provides an additional temporary housing option for eligible households. Given the limited supply of PPHS flats, the income ceiling of $7,000 was introduced in August 2021, along with some other criteria, to prioritize those who are less able to afford renting on the open market. The income ceiling of $7,000 is pegged to the typical income ceiling for 3-room BTO flats in non-mature estates. It is also well above the median monthly household income of PPHS applicants, which was $5,700 before the income ceiling was introduced, and $4,400 in the past year since the income ceiling was put in place. While we are on track to double the supply of interim flats for PPHS between 2021 and 2023, the supply remains limited. As such, we will retain the income ceiling so as to continue prioritizing those who are less able to afford renting on the open market. Households whose incomes exceed the $7,000 ceiling but who need help with temporary housing due to exceptional circumstances, such as high medical expenses or other needs, may approach HDB, and HDB will consider their request on a case-by-case basis.
Ms. Denise Poh.
Thank you, Minister. And my questions are really directed towards the national objective of marriage and parenthood, or promoting that. Would M&D consider a different type of BTO, a built then order instead of built to order scheme, so that flats can be built in advance for registered couples, for example, registered married couples, for example, applying for the first time, in order to encourage marriage and parenthood. I know that building in advance creates stock inventory, but it might be costly. But if we could ring fence this for marriage and parenthood, for which the nation is already spending quite a bit of money, it might be well worth it. So that's my first SQ. My second SQ is this, that Minister would consider helping young couples beyond the between 7,000 to 14,000, which is actually the eligibility for applying BTO flats, that allowing to help them get a rental on interim basis. This is again based on what we know about the market, that many young couples are renting flats so that before they get their BTOs. And they are actually, if they live with their parents, they might be also delaying parenthood. So again, all the questions are directed towards promoting marriage and parenthood. For consideration, please.
Madam Speaker, the member asked for a bill then order model. In fact, I've just described the shorter waiting time model, which has been in place since 2018, where we launched the project, launched construction, or rather we launched construction and then launched the project. So as a result, applicants can get their flat under 3 years. The construction disruptions and delays during COVID had affected some of that pipeline, but nevertheless, as I said, even during COVID, we launched some 7,200 shorter waiting time flats, so 2020 to 2022, and we'll work towards launching more of such shorter waiting time flats with waiting times of 3 years or less, subject to site and infrastructure readiness. So that is something we're committed to do. But in addition to that, of course, we have the sale of balance flats exercise, the open selection of flats exercise by HDB, and of course, resale flats are available with grants. And at this point in time, while resale prices have gone up, with measures to moderate demand, we hope to manage the price increases in the resale market as well to ensure affordability for first-time home buyers. As for her request to raise or remove the income ceiling for PPHS, I explained earlier why we need to maintain this for the time being. Demand has been high, particularly because of the construction delays caused by COVID. We recognize that there are housing needs. HDB is prepared, even if the income ceiling is above 7,000, to look at individual circumstances to see how we can help them. We have doubled the supply, or will double the supply of PPHS flats by the end of this year and early next year, but supply remains limited. We have been using some of the SIRS units, some of the unsold units. We've also taken some rental flats, and of course you see there's a trade-off there. And we've also taken staff apartments from polytechnics and repurposed them for PPHS during this period. So I think to provide support for those who may have even greater difficulty affording rental in the interim, we maintain the income ceiling, as well as a priority for married couples with children below the age of 18.
Ms. Fumiha.
Thank you, Speaker. I'd like to ask the Minister for two supplementary questions. I think Minister did allude to HDB attempt to complete within 3 years. Can the Minister actually give some guidance exactly, what percentage of future launches will likely fall within the 3-year time frame? So just give us a guidance. Secondly, given the the risk around supply chain disruptions due to geopolitical tensions, I would like to ask the Minister to comment about the strategies the government would adopt to build stockpiles of building materials to avoid delays, and how does the government intend to buffer against price variations?
I thank the member for questions. HDB's mission remains the same even through COVID, and even as we continue to deal with the after effects on the construction sector and on development of properties in general arising from the last 2 years pandemic. And in fact, to ensure affordability and accessibility, we've been doing a couple of things. Right? First, increasing subsidies to ensure that BTO flat prices remain stable even amidst the property price increases across the board. Secondly, we have been ramping up supply of flats. So the member mentioned the ramp up in BTO supply in between 2021 to 2025, 100,000 flats if necessary. Thirdly, in August this year, we channeled even greater percentage of the BTO stock towards first-time home buyers, people buying their first homes. We have also put in property cooling measures to moderate demand in the resale market. And lastly, of course, tackling the issue of construction delays, people waiting for their flats, and HDB working very closely with the contractors, working very closely with their supply chain to manage overall construction delays, and there has been progress made on that front. We need to expedite construction, but do so safely and without compromise to the quality of flats. The member alluded to supply chain disruptions. In fact, the last 2 years, both HDB and all developers and contractors have been affected by supply chain disruptions because a lot of material comes from abroad, right? Construction material, parts, so on and so forth, even manpower to help us construct. And during the pandemic and emerging from COVID, HDB continues to work very closely with our contractors, helping them to obtain the manpower that's necessary, helping them to stabilize prices of steel and concrete through HDB's schemes to support the contractors, and working very hard with our local supply chain to ensure greater local or domestic resilience, whether by stockpiling off-site, stockpiling in Singapore, and working more closely with our prefabrication plants to have the capability to churn out more components for HDB flats. Through standardization and good design, we can achieve that. And recently in the HDB Awards, I announced more efforts by HDB to try out new methods of construction that will allow it to drive even greater productivity and hence be more resilient to supply chain disruptions that may come in future. As for the member's question about the percentage of shorter waiting time flats, as I said earlier, we had delivered 7,200 over the last 2 years. There has been an impact because BTO demand has been high, and also there's been disruption to construction. And we work hard to raise the quantum of shorter waiting time flats, even as we continue to grapple with the after effects of COVID.
Sir Murali Pillai.
Mr. Speaker, sir, I would like to ask a supplementary question to the Honourable Minister in relation to the PPHS supply. The Honourable Minister mentioned that the supply is still quite tight. The government's decision to double the PPHS units is most welcome. My question is in relation to the number of applicants who satisfy the current criteria of meeting the salary ceiling of $7,000 or below. How many people who satisfy the salary income still can't get the PPHS units, and what options are there for them? And in this regard, I had in my PQ 38 set down for order paper today, made two suggestions. One is in relation to support for applicants who can't rely on their families to get rental flats from the public rental market. And the other one is in relation to some form of grant to enable them to get the rental flat on their own. Thank you.
I think the member has asked the question actually further down the line, but since you've already asked, I'm just wondering whether to wait till then or give you a sneak peek into the answer I'm going to give you. Since August of 2021, 1,930 families were eligible for PPHS and had applied. About 580 of them were invited to select the PPHS flat, of whom about 330 selected and were allocated such a flat, and 250 did not select the flat when invited to do so, which suggests that they did not like the option that was made available to them, or they had other housing options. The remaining 1,350 applicants were unsuccessful in their ballot. And both prior to the imposition of the income ceiling and the other measures, and even now with the measures in place, on average, we see about 47% of PPH applicants who decide not to make a selection while they're invited to do so. But of course, that means others further down the queue will then be invited, and that ensures that the flats are occupied.
Sir Vikram Nair.
Yes, I thank the Minister for, the answers to many of the burning questions that are being faced by people looking for HDB flats. One suggestion I had previously made was to actually look at the supply of resale flats and how we can have more of that in the market, because we have more resale flats in the market that would lower the resale price and hopefully get more first-timers to look into the resale market. And the suggestion I previously made was actually to look at reducing or waiving the MOP period for resale flats. And to be fair, I think the answer I was given then was that may not be a viable solution because those who sell resale flats will go back into the market. So would the minister consider waiving or reducing the MOP period for those who sell resale flats but don't intend to go back into the market, say for those who are moving to stay with their children or maybe even upgrading to private property?
The MOP period is intended to reinforce the owner-occupation intent for public housing. Whether it's 5 years, 10 years, or somewhere in between, we have to strike a balance because ultimately there's a waiting time, there's an MOP period to occupy your flats, and then people's life stages may change. With children on the way, they may need more space, they may need to move to school, they may have other arrangements. And so when people need to sell their flats within MOP, generally we don't waive, but we do look at individual applications on a case-by-case basis to understand the circumstances they face in deciding whether to grant the waiver of MOP or not. And in fact, that will, in a way, serve to cater to the groups of people who need to move during the period. But whether we will do so in order to increase the supply of resale flats in the market, I'm not quite so sure. All right, when you shorten the MOP period, most of the time you see that then there will be demand in other parts of the market.